Okay, James, thanks so much. As we continue to follow this breaking news, the IDF now expanding ground operations in Gaza, even alerting 229 hostage families about this expansion. The world still wanting to know what happens after Hamas is dismantled, and if indeed it is. What is Israel's endgame if its military machine wipes out these terrorists and the political power that they maintain in Gaza? Israel's former ambassador to the U.S. and former member of the Israeli Knesset, Michael Oren, joining me now. Michael, the timing is perfect here because I know you're still plugged in. You do have a number of sources. You talk directly to those that are making these moves here. Let me ask you, what will this expansion look like? What do you see happening tonight?
Good evening, Kara. What's happening tonight is the ground invasion will get off the ground. It has to get off the ground. We're up against a number of clocks, not the least of which is that we have 360,000 reservists mobilized. That's probably more reservists than there are in the entire U.S. military. And these are young people in their 20s and their 30s. They're away from their families, away from their jobs now for 3 whole weeks. The state simply can't sustain that for much longer. And there are other clocks. There are the clocks of the hostages, the clocks of the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Israel has to move, and it will move shortly. I'm not going to give you the exact hour, but it'll move shortly. When that happens, we will advance as fast as we possibly can while preserving the lives of our soldiers. I'm an old soldier myself. I've been in situations like this before. You're talking about the most nightmarish situation for any soldier. It's going into a built-up area that's heavily mined, heavily booby-trapped, but that's just the beginning of it. The major battleground is actually beneath the surface, where Hamas has dug dozens, perhaps hundreds of kilometers of tunnels and bunkers, which are also heavily mined, and our hostages are down there, 229 hostages. So you just can't flood these tunnels. You can't throw in a match. It's not going to work. So you have to go into tunnel, bunker. It's going to take time. And when it's over, I think the United States has made I'm not a spokesman for the government. I may be plugged in, but I'm not a spokesman. I think the United States has made a valid request to know what the end game is. And I think the end game is going to look something like this: demilitarization of Gaza, the emplacement of a government, a ruling situation where it is not dedicated to terror. It's dedicated to developing the Gaza Strip. But by the way, the Gaza Strip is a very fertile area. When there were Israeli settlements there, they provided all the organic vegetables for the state of Israel. It's got a great coastline, a tremendous potential there under the right government. And I would hope that the Israeli government will work to internationalize the Gaza situation. So it won't be an Israeli problem, not even an Egyptian problem.
Michael, let me jump in. Sorry, it was taking me a while to get my mic up. You just broke some news. You just said that a ground invasion is going to happen. You're not giving the exact time, but you're saying it is going to happen tonight. So tell me what that is going to look.
No, I did not tonight. I think it's going to be underway. It's going to be under shortly because we have these clocks. And I think, yes, they're going to have to move in. And I think that beyond that, any talk of a ceasefire, and another clock is the rising demands for a ceasefire. Understand that a ceasefire for Israel means, and I'm not exaggerating, means death. It means Hamas gets away with murder, not just murder, with massacring 1,400 Israeli citizens. It means that we can't restore our security to the south. Citizens can't go back. We have 300,000 displaced people. It means we lose our deterrence power in a region which is very hostile to us. And other powers like Iran, Hezbollah may take advantage of that. We can't have a ceasefire. So we have to move quickly. I can't tell you what's going to be tonight. I can't tell you it's going to be tomorrow morning. But it will be. But it is
going to happen. You say it is going to happen. Okay, so then let me ask you this, because the IDF said that they did reach out to 229 hostage families, saying that they are expanding the ground activity. What did the IDF tell these hostage families? Do you know?
I don't. I've been in touch with a number of hostage families. I meet with 2 or 3 of them per day. And yes, they expect the government to do everything possible to get them back. There were apparently, here I don't know, there were apparently some negotiations through Qatar that the government has concluded, and the military has concluded, that Hamas is just working to gain time. Hamas will release maybe 1 or 2 hostages of very high-profile nature that will increase international pressure on Israel to accept that ceasefire. And that's an impossible situation.
Will that happen before a massive ground incursion? Will we see more hostages be released?
I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know. I'm not a spokesman for Hamas. I'm not. I don't know. Their their modus operandi has been to release a certain number of hostages that are high profile. They get headlines, and the demands for ceasefires will increase around the world. We can't do that. They're using this time to build up their defenses. They're using this time to jack up whatever price they're going to have for these hostages. At the end of the day, they're going to use the hostages as human shields, just as they use the Palestinian population as human shields.
So Michael, were these families told, these hostage families told, that there could be loss of life, that their loved one may die in this incursion?
No, they were told that the IDF will do everything possible. The state will do everything possible to rescue them. And we have special forces that are trained to do precisely that. If Hamas were today to release all of the hostages without condition in return for maybe even a small pause in our offensive, we would certainly agree to that. But Hamas is not going to agree to that. It's going to use them as human shields. And that is the reality of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a evil, dark, terrorist organization that rapes, burns, dismembers, beheads, and takes 229 innocent people, including some 30 children, aged people, Holocaust survivors. That's what we're dealing with.
So this expansion,
we have to.
Let me ask you about this expansion, okay? Because it's out there now. The IDF is saying we are expanding ground operations, period. We're doing it tonight. So as much as you can, detail for me what that is going to look like. What does that mean, expanding operations?
Expanding operations so far has meant, first of all, escalating the aerial bombardment, also ground and sea bombardment of Hamas positions within Gaza. It's a softening up, if you will, of some of the battle areas in which our combat troops will be entering. It is trying to locate the tunnels. Now, I'll tell you honestly, this I can say, that taking out a tunnel and a bunker from the air or even by an artillery shell is very difficult. These tunnels go 30 feet below the ground. And we know from a fact that Hamas's main headquarters is situated underneath the major hospital in Gaza. And the Hamas is preventing civilians from leaving that hospital area by gunpoint. And there are estimated 30,000 civilians that Hamas is basically holding hostage around the hospital. These are Palestinian hostages, not Israeli hostages. So this is how complicated can this get? It is immensely complicated. Any civilian casualties who are kept at gunpoint around that hospital, that is what Hamas is doing and not the state of Israel's doing. We've told these people to move away from the battle area as best as they can. Hamas is preventing them from leaving.
How do you go in and take out those tunnels?
It's a hard one. We have units that are trained to do this. It's extremely hazardous duty. Their levels of casualties are much higher than even the paratroopers or other infantry groups. They have to go into the tunnels and close them and ferret out when they are cleared. They are blown up. And that has been our experience in previous rounds of fighting. It's going to be immensely complicated to the presence of our hostages. P.S. We actually don't know where they are. They could be in different places. Many of the hostages, Harry, you should know, are not in the hands of Hamas. Hamas has indicated it doesn't even know where all the hostages are. Some are in the hands of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the other terrorist group in Gaza, wholly armed and operated by Iran. But some of them are in the hands of families. These are people who crossed the border with Hamas, took hostages and brought them back, and at some point will sell them for a price.
So let me ask you, Michael, what is the end game here? If indeed the IDF goes in, expands operations, dismantles Hamas, who leads the Gaza people?
I think you have to have a interim government, at least, that has certainly Palestinian representation in it, but it could also have representation from other Arab countries. I just think it's in Israel's interest. I strongly believe that's interest is to internationalize as much as possible the Gaza situation. So it's not just Israel's problem. It's not just Egypt's problem. And it's clearly just not Israel's problem, Egypt's problems, because you can see what this conflict has done to the entire region. And now even the United States moving major naval assets to the region, all because of Gaza, because of Hamas. So that situation.
But is that plan in place, Michael? Is that plan in place?
I hope it is. I certainly have been talking about it for a long time. And by the way, the question about endgame has come up in virtually every round of fighting. I remember in 2014, during the Protection Edge issue, this came up again. And our endgame, unfortunately, didn't work. Our endgame was to say something like quiet for quiet. Hamas kept quiet. We kept quiet. We let an immense amount of Qatari cash flow into the lap of Hamas. We let 20,000 Gazan workers come in every day to Israel at great risk. And we thought that Hamas would prefer stability. We thought that Hamas would prefer sort of progressing, advancing the quality of life of the citizens of Gaza. No, Hamas is about one thing and one thing only, and that's killing us. And, there may be fuel shortages in Gaza, but there's no fuel shortages for Hamas. Tonight we had on the Israeli news, there was a recording of Hamas commanders talking about how they have a 500,000 gallons of fuel underground, and they have no problem. So there's no problem with electricity, no problem with water, no problem with food. They don't care about their own citizens. If I have time, I'll tell you that for about a year, I was in charge by the Israeli government, made me in charge of Gaza. You don't want this job. And what I learned in that year, I didn't learn in 20 years of university, and that is that everything you know about human decency, everything you know about civilization, when it comes to Hamas, throw it out the window. They don't care. They're about death.
So one more question. I want to bring in our James Longman, who's there on the ground. If Hamas is dismantled, like the IDF says it plans to do, then how do you prevent another group of terrorists, a terrorist cell, to intimidate the Palestinian people who don't support terrorists, who don't support Hamas? How do you prevent the same thing from happening again, or a rise in power from another group of terrorists?
There's nothing foolproof about this. Hamas is the same thing as ISIS, the same thing as Al-Qaeda, same thing as Hezbollah. They have exactly the same theology. It's to take over the Middle East, transform it into a caliphate, and then expand its borders to include the entire globe. Hamas just wants to destroy the state of Israel as the first step in that process. They're exactly the same. You can't destroy the idea of these organizations, of these terrorist organizations. What you can do is degrade them. So when you take out ISIS today, ISIS is still a threat, but it's not the threat that it was in 2017. You can say the same thing about, there are lots of neo-Nazis around today, but they don't have the power now that Nazi Germany doesn't exist. You can degrade them, and you can reduce that threat and make it manageable, hopefully by an international or inter-Arab force.
Michael, stay with us, please. We're talking with Israel's former ambassador to the U.S. and former member of the Israeli Knesset, also member of the IDF as well, Michael Oren. Stay with us. We're going to take a quick break. We want to bring our James Longman there in Tel Aviv into this discussion as well. If you're just tuning in, expanding ground operations taking place in Gaza tonight. That's coming straight from the IDF. 229 hostage families have been alerted. We've got more news right after this quick break.